Let everything that hath breath praise ye the Lord. Welcome back to another episode of Searching the Scriptures Diligently, the channel where we go through the Bible, scripture, and verse. Today's episode, we're going to talk about slavery in the Bible. We're going to talk about slavery in the Old Testament. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So we know this is an emotional topic, right? But we're going to talk about what thus saith the Lord. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that we cannot take our modern ideas, our modern times, our modern culture, and then transport that into the text. Okay? It was a different time, different culture, and our ideas of chattel slavery is not what you see here in the Old Testament. So you have to keep that in mind. So, with that being said, so how do people become slaves in the Old Testament? A lot of times people became slaves because of war. So you may have been an enemy and you lost the battle, and then you were taken captives to a foreign land. We see that when Babylon invaded Israel and they went captive down to Babylon to become slaves. Another way people became slaves, the Bible oftentimes is through volunteering. Sounds strange, but as a way to pay off debt, you may be poor and not having enough substance or resources, and selling yourself, selling your services is a way to pay off debt, right? Or hire yourself out essentially to a wealthy person, and they would pay off your debt, but then you would then owe them time. People may become slaves um, because of, like, females. Women may become slaves because their fathers maybe sold them, right? In hopes that they would marry into a higher um, socioeconomic status. So those are some of the ways people became slaves. Um, you really don't see a lot of slaves in our ideology of, like, being kidnapped and taken away. You don't really see that. Okay, so that's why I want to mention that our ideas of slavery is not what the Bible talks about most of the time. So the so let's look at a couple of scriptures, and then we'll go through our study. Let's go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 23. Let's look at the verse Leviticus, chapter 23. So the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verse 22 says, "And when ye reap the harvest of your land," so oftentimes people would go into slavery because of poverty, as we mentioned. God had some provisions to help the poor people. One of the provisions he had was you shouldn't glean your field a second time. Leave the corner of the field ungleaned for the poor of the land. We see that with Ruth and Naomi when they were widows and they were poor, and they had to glean in the field of Boaz, so they wouldn't starve to death. So Poverty, the reason people oftentimes went into slavery, God had a provision for it because he wanted not the people to be poor, but because of sin and all that had to do, even Jesus came along later and said, the poor you will have with you always. Now let's look at Leviticus 23:22. It says, and when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not make clean riddance of the corners of thy field when thou reapest, neither shalt thou gather any gleaning of thy harvest. Thou shalt leave them unto the poor and to the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So God wanted to make provision so the poor would have something to eat. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verses 19. And when thou cuttest down thine harvest in thy field, and hast forgot a sheaf in the field, so like a bundle of wheat, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And you're going to see that repeated. Those people, stranger, the fatherless, and for the widow. People who are at risk of being taken advantage of. That the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand. When thou beatest thine olive tree, thou shalt not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. When thou gatherest the grapes of thy vineyard, thou shalt not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. Okay, so he's telling them, you're basically saving a little for the poor people because thou wast a slave in Egypt. So you know what that felt like. We said one of the reasons sometimes people put themselves into slavery was to pay off debt, right? A lot of times we read where they owed a great debt. And, they said, either you're going to pay me or we're going to take you to the tormentors and lock you up, right? That's basically what they were talking about. And hiring yourself out or voluntarily selling yourself into indentured servitude or slavery was a way to pay off your debt. Sometimes they would do it for themselves, their wives, their children, until all the debt was paid off. Right? So when you were in the service or a servant of the person that you owe the money to, right? I mean, they own your time. So, you're going to work with them for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is, to pay off the debt. But if you're just a regular poor person and you are having a hard time even keeping food on the table, you may just pay yourself out or hire yourself out to or volunteer yourself to be a slave just to make sure that you don't starve to death. Let's go to the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to look at some different types of slaves. Right? We'll say there's a couple of ways to become slave. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 20. And let's look at verses 10 and 11. When thou comest nigh unto a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it. And it shall be, if it make thee answer of peace and open unto thee, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee. In other words, we know that God said, the children of Israel he gave them instruction to slaughter all the inhabitants of the people around them, the ungodly people, the people who did idol worship, who believe in other gods. And that's what he's saying here. When you go close to them, make an answer of peace. If they will open up their gates to you, then they will be tributaries to you. That means they're going to be indentured servants and work for you and serve thee. So the alternative is basically, if they don't, then you're going to make war. Because in verse 12 it says, and if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. See that? In verse 13. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered in verse 13, and when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hand, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. When God is going to deliver it, you're going to kill all the men. But the women and the little ones and the cattle, and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself. And thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. Thus shalt thou do unto all the cities which are very far off from thee, which are not of the cities of these nations. So all the men, so either they make peace and then become your servants, or if they make war, you destroy all the men, right? But keep the women, the children, and the cattle and the spoil. So you see, that's one way where they get slaves from war and victims of war, or the ones who lose. The one way where they get slaves, or from war that they fight, and the losers of the war. So the one way in which they get the Egyptians got slaves. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 21 and look at verse 10 through 13. You see, usually the males are killed, right? As we saw what happened. And that's a common theme you will see throughout. Deuteronomy 21. And now look at verse 10 through 13. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hand, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to thy wife. Then thou shalt bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. And she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month. And after that thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thy wife. So what is he saying here? He's saying that after you wage war with your enemy, and you see and you have defeated them, and you see a beautiful woman, and you have a desire to have her, then she shall be in your house. You're gonna shave her head, and then she shall mourn a month for her parents. And then afterwards, you can marry her and then have sex with her. That's what it's saying. So foreigners become slaves, prisoners of war, essentially. We see this even in the New Testament. Go to Matthew 1 and 5. We see it in the New Testament. Go to Matthew 1 and 5. In Matthew 1 and 5, right, when they're given the genealogy of Christ, when you go to verse 5, it says, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. We know that Rahab was a prostitute. When the children of Israel went into Jericho, they first sent out 2 spies to spy out the land. Joshua sent them out. And the 2 spies went into the inn that Rahab worked in, and she owned the inn. And the Bible tells us how the men came to look for the spies and say, bring out the spies. We know that they come to spy out the land. And Rahab said, yes, men did come, but they have gone. But she actually hid them on the roof under like some wheat and straw. She said, they have left. If you hurry, you can catch them. But here, so after, because she said, because even Rahab said, we know that the Lord has given you the land, and the terror and the dread of you have come upon all men, and our heart is melted like wax. So obviously, the children of Israel took over that land. When Rahab said, spare me, and they said, we will spare you our life for yours if you utter not our business. And they said, everyone that's in your house, if a hair of theirs fall to the ground, it should be on our head. But if they're in the street, their blood is on their hand. and they told her to put the scarlet ribbon outside her window. But the bottom line is that when they came back and took over the land, they speared her, and obviously, as a prisoner of war, they probably killed all the men. She was speared, and somebody married her, obviously. And Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. So Salmon married Rahab, even though she was a Gentile and a prisoner of war. So we see that we see it put in actual practice. The other people category of people we'll see who voluntarily sometimes put themselves into slavery or indentured servitude, or people who owed money. They were debtors, right? Like we said, poor people could sell themselves to pay off their debt. They could sell themselves to rich or wealthy people that they owed money to, right? So a poor man could sell himself to a rich man if he didn't have enough to pay off his debt. Sometimes they would sell not only themselves, but they would sell their entire family, their wives and their children. We see in the book of Genesis where Jacob worked as a slave to Laban so he can marry Rachel. We see that. Let's go to the book of Genesis. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 29. The book of Genesis, chapter 29, and look at verses 15 through 20. And it says, And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, which but Rachel was beautiful and well favored. So I'd assume tender-eyed, the opposite of beautiful, maybe made your eyes hurt, right? And well favored. Verse 18. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, right? So Jacob is telling Laban, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. In other words, he's going to work and be a servant for him for 7 years. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Verse 20. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. So you see that in that case where he is actually working as essentially a servant for the bride price, essentially. Now let's look at some opportunities for freedom, okay, in terms of slavery. So opportunities for freedom. As we go through, you're going to see the different treatments between the Israelites, between the Hebrew slaves versus the non-Hebrew slaves. You see different treatment. This is Exodus 21 and 2. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. See, there's like a time limit on a Hebrew slave. They could only be a slave for 6 years, and then on the 7th year they go out. They call it the year of release or the year of Jubilee. Let's go to Deuteronomy 15. Deuteronomy 15. And we will start at verse 12 and we go to 18. And if thy brother an Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman be sold unto thee, and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go free from thee. So again, time limit under slavery, and not like in our modern day slavery or in our recent past. Verse 13. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. So only 6 years he could be a slave, and then you let him go, but he doesn't go out empty. Verse 14, thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, meaning thy threshing floor, meaning wheat and grain, and out of thy winepress, meaning wine, of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto him. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee, meaning he bought you free, bought your freedom. Therefore I command thee this thing today. And it shall be, if he say unto thee, I will not go away from thee, because he loveth thee and thine house, because he is well with thee, then thou shalt take an awl, and thrust it through his ear unto the door, and he shall be thy servant forever. Only if he chooses not to go free, because he likes his life. So he had a choice. And also unto thy maidservant thou shalt do likewise. It shall not seem hard unto thee, when thou sendest him away free from thee. For he has been worth a double hired servant to thee, in serving thee 6 years. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all that thou doest. So he works for 6 years. There's a time clock if he's a Hebrew slave. He leaves on the 7th year, and he leaves free. He gets his freedom, but he doesn't go out empty-handed. Look at that. Let's go to the book of Leviticus. Let's go to the book of Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 25. Leviticus chapter 25. And we go verses 39 through 46. This is going to talk about Hebrew servants, the treatment. They're supposed to be treated like hired servants, not bond servants, right? The Hebrew servants are supposed to be treated like almost like tradesmen, like a hired employee, right? Versus bond servants. Verse 39. And if thy brother shall dwelleth by thee, be waxen poor, and be sold unto thee, right? He's talking about a Hebrew being sold to another Hebrew, right? And if thy brother shall dwelleth by thee, be waxen poor, and be sold unto thee, thou shalt not compel him to serve as a bondservant. You can't force him to be served as a bondservant or slave, but as an hired servant, almost like an employee, and as a sojourner or traveler. He shall be with thee, and shall serve thee unto the year of the Jubilee, at the year of the release. And then shall he depart from thee, both he and his children with him, and shall return unto his own family, and unto the possession of his fathers shall he return. So him, and his family can go unto his own family, unto his possession of his fathers shall he return unto his own land, his inheritance. For they are my servants, which I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as bondmen. So because they're Hebrew, it's better treatment. Thou shalt not rule over him with rigor or with hardness, but shalt fear thy God. Both thy bondmen and thy bondmaids, which thou shalt have, shall be of the heathen. If you're going to have slaves, they're going to be non-Hebrew, non-Israelite. They're going to be of the heathen that are round about you. Of them shall ye buy bondmen and bondmaids. So God seems to be saying here that there's different treatment. If they're Hebrew Israelites, you treat them more of a hired servants. You're not going to treat them as bondmen and bondwomen. But if they're the heathens, them you could treat as bondmen and bondwomen. Verse 45. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. So your bond man and thorn, you come from the children of the strangers, and he shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. So he's saying 6 year limit on the Hebrew Israelite. But of the heathen strangers, and you can pass them on, but over your they shall be your bondmen, and then there's no time limit. That's forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule one over another with rigor. So that is a hard reading right there, right? You see the difference in treatment. The Israelites only 6 year limit. Free have to be free on the year of the Jubilee or the year of release, and not go out empty handed. They're gonna get the fruit of the wheat and the wine, and they're gonna go out with the wife, their family that they came with, and back to their possession. And you contrast that to the treatment of the strangers, the heathen around them, right? The Hebrews were treated like bond. The Hebrews were treated like hired servants and not like bondmen, but the strangers are treated like bondmen and bondwomen. In fact, he said, out of them you should get your bondmen and bondwomen. And there's no time limit. It says, and then you can pass them on to your children as an inheritance, and they can be yours as a possession forever. There is no time limit. But don't rule with rigor over your brothers. But it never said there's anything about not ruling with rigor over the heathens. Mm, that's a hard one right there, right? Now, let's go to Leviticus 25. And look again at the treatment of the. This is Leviticus 25, and we're gonna go from verse 47 through 55. These are Hebrew servants that are now bought by strangers. The last one we just read is Hebrew servants bought by other Hebrews. Now look at Hebrew servants bought by strangers. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by you, meaning they're non-Hebrew. Sojourner or stranger is a non-Hebrew. And if a sojourner or stranger wax rich by thee, and thy brother, meaning a Hebrew, that dwelleth by him, wax poor, and sell himself unto the stranger or sojourner by thee, or to the stock of the stranger's family, right? So the stranger is wealthy, the Hebrew Israelite is poor. And they sell himself to the stranger or to his descendants. Verse 48. After that he is sold, he may be redeemed, which means to be bought back. You see how a way is made. A way is made, hallelujah, for redemption for the Hebrew because of the covenant that God had with them. It's about relationship. God had a relationship with the Hebrew that he does not have with the heathen. In the Old Testament, we know now it's different because God is not a respected person. But at that time, he had a relationship with the Hebrews that he didn't have with the non-Hebrews or the Gentiles. And because of that, special provisions was made. After that he is sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brethren may redeem him. Either his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or any that is nigh of kin unto him of his family may redeem him. Or if he be able, he may redeem himself. And he shall reckon with him that bought him from the year that he was sold to him unto the year of Jubilee. So basically, he's saying that the Jew that is bought by a non-Jew will not have to work forever, only until the year of the Jubilee or the seventh year. So if he sold himself on the year one, then he has to work until the year of Jubilee. So he has to work, I guess, 6 years. But if he sold himself on the fifth year, then he'll only have to work for 2 years, I guess. The fifth year and the sixth year, and then he'll be freed on the seventh year. Provision was made for the Jew. And we contrast that with the sojourner or the non-Jew or the Gentile, how it could be forever. And the price of his sale shall be according unto the number of years, according to the time of an hired servant shall it be with him. See, again, that different designation, hired servant. If there be yet many years behind, according unto them he shall give again the price of his redemption out of the money that he was bought for. Let's read 51 again. If there be yet many years behind, according unto them he shall give again the price of his redemption out of the money that he was bought for. So it looks like these Hebrews that are bought by strangers are going to be given money, right? They're going to be given money, and then he can use that money to redeem himself. That's what it looks like. If there be yet many years behind, according unto them, he shall give again the price of his redemption out of the money that he was bought for. And if there remain but few years unto the time of Jubilee, verse 52, and if there remain but few years unto the year of Jubilee, then he shall count with him, and according unto his years shall he give him again the price of his redemption. And as a yearly hired servant shall he be with him, and the other shall not rule with rigor over him in thy sight. So you see the better treatment here for the Hebrew that is a slave or servant to the non-Hebrew. He's going to be treated like a hired servant, right? And the stranger shall not rule over him with rigor in thy sight. That meaning you are going to have to make sure that he doesn't abuse him. Verse 54. But notice there's no such treatment for the non-Hebrew. Verse 54. And if he be not redeemed in these years, then he shall go out in the year of Jubilee, both he and his children with him. So even if he's not redeemed in those years, he still goes out in the year of Jubilee. For unto me, the children of Israel are servants. They are my servants whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord thy God. So you see the different treatment, all because of their relationship to God. Now let's look at some laws in the book of Exodus, chapter 21. Some laws regarding servants, both male servant and female servant. Let's look at Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21. Laws regarding servants. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the seventh he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. Better treatment for the Jew. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. So here's a little difference. If he came in by himself, he goes out by himself. If he came in married, then he can go out with his wife. If his master have given him a wife, and she has beared him children, the wife and her children shall be her master, and he shall go out by himself. So if the wife was given to him by the master, then when he leaves alone, because essentially the wife didn't belong to you. The wife was given by the master. Maybe the master gave him the wife to get more servants in the house, right? But that wasn't his wife. So she was essentially belonged to the master. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So only if he refuses to go and said, I'd rather stay with my family and my master, then he will bore his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Mm. So now we look at the laws regarding maid servants. But even then, he had a choice. The Jew had the male Jew had a choice, right? If he came in alone, he left alone. If he came in married, he left married. Only when the wife was given to him by the master, then he had some decisions to make. Either he could leave alone and leave the wife and the children to the master, or he can say, I'm going to stay with them and be a slave forever. So let's look at when the slave is a female. Exodus 21, verse 7. We'll read 7 through 11. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, again, it could be because of poverty, it could be because he wanted her to marry a man of a higher status. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. So the man sell his daughter to be a maidservant in the master's house. She doesn't get her freedom like the male servant says go, even at the year of Jubilee. Because the purpose of him selling his daughter to her was for her to marry the master or one of his sons. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. If the master doesn't want her, then shall he let her be redeemed, or let her be bought back, right? Maybe by some of her relative or something. To sell her unto a stranger nation, he, meaning the master, shall have no power, seeing he has dealt deceitfully with her. So he bought her, probably promising her father that he's going to marry her or one of his sons, and end up not doing it. It said like these women who were sold into like slavery, sort of, they had the expectations to become a wife to the master or one of his sons. We see that in the example of Hagar, the Egyptian. She was a concubine, right? Probably bought her because Sarah, Abraham's wife, was barren. And she was probably bought with the expectation that she was going to be Abraham's wife. And indeed, she was a concubine and did bear Abraham a son. Verse 9. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. Verse 10. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage, meaning sexual relations, shall be not diminished. Meaning, if he promised to, take her on as a maid servant, and to marry her potentially, and then all of a sudden he changed his mind, her benefits shall not decrease. Verse 11. And if he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. So if he doesn't take care of her food wise, or clothes wise, or sexually wise, then she shall go out free. She shall be free, and she doesn't have to pay any money. So that is the end, guys. We'll stop there. I know this is a little unusual topic, but we see rules, we see regulations, and we don't see the type of brutality that was seen in recent past regarding slavery. If there's people out there you think could benefit from studying the Bible and go through the Bible scripture and verse, let them know about the channel, searching the scriptures diligently. I'll appreciate a thumbs up, a like, a subscription, and until next time, search the scriptures, and they are they which testify of me, and in them ye think ye have eternal life.